The toxic water crisis that's affecting Florida, from red tide on our beaches to toxic algae blooms in lakes and ponds all across the state. And they're caused by different things and affect our health in different ways, too. Craig Patrick joins us now. He's been looking into some of this. And, you know, we hear this so often every year now, Craig, that we start to think, gee, is there really anything we can do about it?
Well, one thing you can do is reduce pollution. Fertilizer runoff, for example, that's a big one, as are leaking septic tanks. But here we are, and we're in a situation particularly with respect to freshwater toxic algae, where those are significant factors, not as much with respect to salt water. But we'll start with salt water. Red tide, because, of course, we're seeing elevated levels of it in Hillsborough and Manatee County, and, of course, the highest concentrations right now off the shores of Pinellas County. Red tide can turn salt water brownish red, which is how it got its name. But we don't have to see discolored slugs offshore to know it's there. When tons of dead fish wash up on our beaches, it's a surefire sign of red tide. And it's caused by an explosion of a microorganism called brevis. It's part of nature and has caused red tide long before man-made pollution. So scientists cannot say the Piney Point spill of water polluted with nutrients is causing the red tide outbreaks we're seeing now. But we do know brevis feeds on nutrients. So the millions of gallons of wastewater that spilled from Piney Point and other types of nutrient pollution could be a contributor. And in addition to killing fish, red tide emits a toxin in the air that people with respiratory problems need to avoid. It's irritating to anyone, which scientists say does carry an upside people don't often think about.
If you're getting exposed to the toxin produced by the red tide, you know right away. You breathe it in, it's like a tear gas. Sounds kind of odd, but I would argue that's kind of a good toxin, because you know you're being exposed to it right away. You can reduce your exposure. You know you're being exposed. As
opposed to other toxins in fresh water that we cannot smell in the air. While brevis works through salt water, odorless cyanobacteria infest fresh waterways. This is commonly known as toxic algae, but it's actually cyanobacteria. And it also feeds on nutrient pollution, and in this case, leaking septic tanks and fertilizer runoff are definitely fueling the blooms. They're most pronounced in Lake Okeechobee to our south, but also show up in lakes and rivers and estuaries, and especially retention ponds across the state. It takes many forms, some more serious than others. One of the most common is Lyngbya, and that's popping up a lot right now. It looks like brown gunk, and people often confuse it for dead seagrass, but it's not. And if you catch and eat fish that ate Lyngbya, it can cause what we call seafood poisoning. But there are also more serious forms that can make the water look like green paint or bluish purple. And that kind of toxic bloom in freshwater releases a toxin called microcystin that scientists have tied to liver damage in people, and a brain toxin called BMAA they've correlated to neurodegenerative disease, which again, unlike red tide, you cannot smell.
Whereas BMA, you can't taste it, smell it, or anything.
And for many years, we've had concentrations of that kind of toxic algae of cyanobacteria in Lake Okeechobee, and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, to address flooding concerns and control of the dike, have been then pumping it east and west through the river systems on both sides of our state, the St. Lucie and the Caloosahatchee rivers, and therefore it starts working through the Fort Myers and West Palm Beach areas and then oozing north in our direction as well. You asked a moment ago, what more can we do about this? Well, the Army Corps of Engineers has a plan to stop doing that, at least as much, contain more water in the lake and release more of it south, and eventually contain more of it in a system of containers in order to prevent the kind of toxic water releases that we've seen now for years.
That is some of the most disgusting video we've ever seen. And you know, Chris and I are up here gagging on set, and to think that that's out there is just horrible. So is there anything we can do personally, say, to get rid of that toxic algae in the ponds and things like that if we see it?
Well, if you see it, you don't want to go near it, much less try to get rid of it. But hazmat specialists can certainly get rid of it. The easiest way, we're told by scientists, is to kill it and sink it. However, that can contribute to sludge and feed next year's bloom. So there is discussions about maybe the most effective ways to dispose of it that are ongoing as we speak. In terms of broader things that we can do, again, avoid excessive use of fertilizer and nutrient pollution in general that feeds those freshwater blooms we know.
Yeah, I think we need a macro approach to this. It seems to me, we talk about this every year, and see it every year, that we need a macro, big-time state approach to this. But that's just me, in my opinion. So, thanks, Greg.